There is a 1967 Ford Mustang fastback out there right now that appeared in one of the most gloriously unhinged action films of the entire 1980s. It was modified, it was filmed, it was driven hard, and then it vanished. Not dramatically, not in a fireball. It just quietly left the building the way film cars always do when nobody's paying attention. And for nearly 4 decades, almost nobody has talked about it. That changes today. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle. We track down the real stories behind the legendary machines that define the films, the decades, and the culture. And today we are going deep on a car that has been hiding in the shadow of its more famous co-star for 38 years. Cobra, the film nobody asked for and everybody needed. You cannot understand this car without understanding the film it came from. And you cannot understand the film without understanding how it almost never got made. The year is 1985. Sylvester Stallone is the most bankable action star on the planet. Rocky has already happened. Rambo has already happened. He is operating at a level of cultural dominance that is almost impossible to describe to someone who didn't live through it. Studios are lining up, scripts are being thrown at him, and one of those scripts is Beverly Hills Cop. Stallone was originally cast in Beverly Hills Cop at Paramount. He did what Stallone does, which is get involved. He rewrote the script almost entirely. He stripped the comedy out, hardened the tone, and built the whole thing around his specific strengths as a performer. Paramount looked at what he'd done to their movie and said, respectfully, absolutely not. The budget had ballooned. The tone was unrecognizable. Eddie Murphy came in, the rest is history, and Stallone walked away with a screenplay's worth of ideas that had nowhere to go. So he channeled all of it into an original script and sold it to Canon Films and Warner Brothers. That became Cobra. And if you've never seen Cobra, I need you to understand something. It is not a subtle film. It is a film where the hero eats pizza with scissors, wears aviator sunglasses indoors, and introduces himself to criminals by pointing a gun at them and saying things that would not be permitted in a workplace environment today. It is magnificent. The character Stallone wrote for himself was Marion Cobretti, an LAPD detective so far outside the system that the system has basically stopped trying to reach him. He operates alone, he plays by his own rules, and he drives cars that have absolutely no business being police vehicles. Plural. Because here's the thing, most people know about Cobra. They know about the Mercury. They know about that sinister, chopped, channeled 1950 Mercury Monterey that haunts basically every frame of the film. Eddie Paul built it. It's a legend. We have covered that story, and you should go watch it if you haven't. But there was another car in that film, and that car is a 1967 Ford Mustang fastback, and almost nobody talks about it. Wait, there was a Mustang? I want to be honest with you here, because this is the kind of thing that separates a real deep dive from a highlight reel. When most people think about the cars in Cobra, they think about the Mercury, full stop. The Mercury is the one on the posters. The Mercury is the one that gets referenced in every retrospective. The Mercury is the one Stallone sued to get back after it was stolen from a storage garage in 1994, which is a whole separate story involving a lawsuit that opened with a line of dialogue from the film itself. And if that's not the most Stallone thing you've ever heard, I don't know what to tell you. The Mustang exists in the film's shadow. It appears in specific sequences, plays a supporting role in the action, and then gets exactly 0 column inches in every piece ever written about this film's automotive history. Which is strange, because a 1967 Mustang fastback is not a car you overlook on purpose. It is one of the most visually arresting production cars Ford ever built. Long hood, short deck, that aggressive fastback roofline sweeping back at an angle that still looks contemporary today. It is the car that launched 1,000 bedroom posters. It is the car that made an entire generation fall in love with American muscle before they were old enough to drive. For it to appear in a major studio action film in 1986 and then essentially disappear from the conversation is, depending on your tolerance for institutional frustration, either baffling or completely predictable. We'll get to why in a moment. First, let's talk about what that car actually was. The build, what Ford actually gave them. A stock 1967 Mustang fastback is already a serious piece of machinery. Ford was in the middle of its first-generation Mustang run, And by 1967, they had sorted out most of the early car's rough edges while keeping everything that made it special. Depending on the engine option, you could get a 289 small block, a 390 GT, or at the very top of the range, the 427 side oiler, a racing engine that had absolutely no business being in a street car and was installed anyway because this was Ford in 1967 and they simply did not care about your blood pressure. The fastback body style, which Ford officially called the sports roof, gave the car a dramatically different silhouette from the coupe or convertible. Lower roofline, rear quarter windows that angled back into the C-pillar, a trunk lid that sat almost parallel to the ground. It looked fast, standing still. When it was moving, it looked like it was already gone. Now, the specific car used in Cobra was not a museum piece when it arrived on set. This was a working film car, which means it was selected, prepared, and modified for the specific demands of production. The color, the mechanical state, the visual details all needed to serve the story and survive the camera. What the production had was a car that fit the character. Cobretti is a man out of time, operating by a code that stopped making sense to anyone else about a decade before the film takes place. A 1967 Mustang in a 1986 movie isn't nostalgia, it's a statement. This man does not update, this man does not compromise. He drove what he drove because he decided to, and if you have a problem with that, he has a shotgun in his trench coat. The modifications made to the car for production were functional rather than radical. Unlike the Mercury, which was essentially rebuilt from the ground up by Eddie Paul's shop in El Segundo, the Mustang received preparation work oriented toward camera viability and performance reliability. Custom visual details were added to distinguish it on screen. The mechanical package was addressed to ensure it could handle the demands of active filming. But the fundamental character of the car, that long hood fastback silhouette, remained intact. It didn't need to be reinvented. It needed to show up and be itself, which it did. Eddie Paul's shadow and who actually did the work. Let me be straight with you here, because this is where a lesser channel would start making things up, and I am not going to do that. Eddie Paul's involvement with the Cobra production is documented and well established in the context of the Mercury. 4 1950 Mercuries, 2 weeks, supercharged Chevrolet 350 small blocks, nitrous oxide systems, full roll cages, the works. That is the confirmed Eddie Paul chapter of the Cobra story, and it is extraordinary. His specific involvement with the Mustang is less clearly documented. And rather than paper over that gap with confident-sounding fabrications, I'm going to tell you what we actually know and what we're working with. What we know is that Cobra was a Canon Films and Warner Brothers production with a serious automotive component, and serious automotive components on major productions. In mid-1980s Hollywood did not get handled by amateurs. The ecosystem of builders and picture car specialists operating in Los Angeles at that time was tight. Eddie Paul was at the top of it, but he wasn't the only professional in the room. Cinema Vehicle Services, which would later end up in possession of one of the surviving Mercury stunt cars, was active in this period. Multiple shops contributed to productions of this scale. What we don't know, with the specificity required to state it as fact, is exactly whose hands did the preparation work on the Mustang, and I think that gap in the record is itself part of the story. Because the Mercury got written about. The Mercury got talked about. The Mercury had Stallone attached to it as a personal vehicle. The Mustang was a production car that served the film, and then went back into the world. Nobody thought to document who built it because nobody thought it would matter 38 years later. They were wrong. On set, what the Mustang actually did. In the film, the Mustang appears in sequences that place it in active conflict situations, the kind of high-stress, high-speed scenarios that Cobra was built around from the opening frame. It is not a background vehicle. It is not set dressing. It participates in the action in ways that required it to perform mechanically and hold together under conditions that film cars are not always expected to survive. The distinction between hero cars and stunt cars is important here. And it applies to the Mustang just as it applied to the Mercury. The hero car is the one the camera falls in love with. Close-ups, interior work, anything requiring the camera to actually live with the vehicle. The stunt cars are the ones that take the hits, the spins, the impacts, the sequences that are specifically designed to destroy them. Productions building for this kind of work typically prepare multiples. because you cannot stake your shooting schedule on a single vehicle that might not walk away from a stunt sequence. The exact number of Mustangs prepared for the Cobra production is one of the details that has not been cleanly documented in any publicly available production record. What can be said with confidence is that the production approach to the Mercury, 4 cars built to consistent spec with clear hero and stunt designations, reflects a production philosophy that would logically extend to other featured vehicles. Whether that means 2 Mustangs or 3, whether the hero car was separate from the cars used in active stunt work, these are questions the paper trail does not currently answer. What the film itself shows us is a car that is treated as a character vehicle, not an afterthought. And character vehicles get prepared properly. That much we can work backward from the screen. When the cameras stopped rolling, here is where the story starts to sting a little. Production on Cobra wrapped in 1985 for a 1986 release. And what happened to the cars when a film wrapped in that era is, if you care about automotive history, a genuinely difficult thing to sit with. There was no preservation culture around film vehicles in the 1980s. This is not an exaggeration, and it's not a criticism unique to the Cobra production. It was simply the standard. Cars were acquired, modified, used, and disposed of through whatever channel was most convenient. Studio prop pools, junkyard sales, private transactions with crew members, fleet returns to manufacturers when the vehicle had been provided as a promotional loan. The method varied. The outcome was consistent. The cars went back into the world with no one watching where they went. The Mercury tells this story clearly. All 4 cars, including the 2 surviving stunt cars and Stallone's personal hero car, were sold to a junkyard in Los Angeles after filming wrapped. Not flagged for archive, not pulled for a studio collection. A junkyard. In the 1980s, that was completely standard practice. And it shocks people today because we live in a world where the Barrett-Jackson auction house sells screen-used vehicles for 6 figures, and the provenance of a film car is a genuine financial asset. In 1986, nobody was thinking that way. The car served the film. The film was done. Move on. The Mustang would have moved through the same disposal pipeline. And because it didn't have the personal connection to Stallone that the Mercury did, because there was no ownership story attached to it, that would make anyone fight to get it back. It left the production and entered the world without anyone noting the door number it walked out of. The long silence. This is the part of the story that frustrates me every single time I dig into a car like this one. And I have dug into a lot of cars like this one. You ready? Here it is. For approximately 38 years, there has been no confirmed public record of the Cobra Mustang appearing at a major auction, entering a museum collection, or surfacing with verified production documentation attached to it. None. Zero. Now, let me be careful here, because absence of a public record is not the same as absence of the car. These are 2 different things, and conflating them is how misinformation starts. The car may be in private hands right now, in absolutely pristine condition, with a complete chain of ownership documented in a filing cabinet somewhere. Private collectors do not owe the internet their inventory. A person can own one of the most historically significant Mustangs in film history and have absolutely no obligation to tell anybody about it. That happens. It happens more often than people realize, but the silence is still significant because when film cars of this cultural stature surface, they tend to surface. The paper trail may be incomplete, but the car usually shows up somewhere. It crosses an auction block. It appears at a concourse. It gets photographed at a car show by someone who recognizes it and posts it online. The Cobra Mercury went missing for 17 years, and even then, Stallone found it on an online auction listing. Cars this visually distinctive, cars with this level of cultural DNA, they tend to announce themselves eventually. The Mustang hasn't. Not yet. The collector circuit and the rumors. There is a universe of people on forums and in comment sections and in private Facebook groups who spend serious time tracking film cars. These are not casual enthusiasts. These are people who cross-reference VIN numbers, pull production records, contact prop houses, and follow cold trails across years without giving up. Furious Garage is a perfect example of what that kind of dedication looks like when it actually pays off. 2 SVT Lightning trucks from the first Fast and the Furious, sitting unrecognized in private hands for over 2 decades, saved from the parts market by people who refuse to stop looking. That is what serious film car research looks like. The Cobra Mustang has generated its share of forum threads. Leads have been posted and debated. Photographs have been analyzed. Claims have been made and then quietly walked back when the documentation didn't hold up. The honest summary of where that conversation currently sits is this. There are threads that are worth following. There are leads that have not been definitively closed. But there is no verified, documented, confirmed location for the screen-used Cobra Mustang that meets the evidentiary standard required to state it as fact on this channel. What I can tell you is this. The car almost certainly did not get crushed. 1967. Mustang fastbacks, even in rough condition, even stripped of their drivetrain, were not the kind of cars that ended up in a crusher in the 1980s without someone noticing and intervening. The collector market for first-generation Mustangs was already active by that point. A fastback in any condition had value. That value was protective. It is far more likely that this car changed hands, possibly several times, and ended up with an owner who may or may not know what they have. And that, right there, is the scenario that keeps me up at night. Because if the car is out there, and I believe it is, it may be sitting in a garage or a storage unit or a backyard right now, owned by someone who sees a nice old Mustang and has no idea that Sylvester Stallone drove it in a movie in 1986 while wearing aviator sunglasses and eating a cold slice of pizza with a pair of scissors. Some context is genuinely priceless. What it would be worth today. Let's talk numbers, because this is the part that makes the whole story feel either exciting or infuriating, depending on your disposition. A clean, documented, unmodified 1967 Mustang, fastback with a desirable engine option, is already a serious collector car. At Barrett-Jackson, depending on configuration and condition, you are talking anywhere from $60,000 at the low end to well north of $150,000 for a properly documented, high-optioned example. That is the baseline. That is what the car is worth before you attach a single frame of film to it. Now, add screen-used provenance, add Stallone, add Cobra, which has only grown in cult stature since its release. The kind of film that gets rediscovered by every new generation that stumbles across it and immediately cannot believe it exists. Add a verifiable chain of custody from the production to the present day. Add documentation. Add photographs from the set. You are now having a very different conversation. Comparable provenance on comparable vehicles suggests you would be looking at $300,000 conservatively. And that is a conservative number. The Cobra Mercury Hero car was valued at over $250,000 in Stallone's lawsuit in 2009. And that was 16 years ago, in a collector market that has only accelerated since. The gap between what this car is worth and how it was treated when the camera stopped rolling is, honestly, a little hard to look at directly. The bigger problem. The Cobra Mustang is not a unique case. That is the thing I need you to understand. It is a representative case. It is what happened to hundreds of film cars in the 1970s and 80s, when the concept of a screen-used vehicle as a collectible artifact simply did not exist in any meaningful institutional way. The Dirty Mary crazy. Larry Charger got sold through a motion picture prop publication, like a used piece of furniture. One of them is currently sitting in a backyard in Sun Valley, California. The lightning trucks from the first Fast and the Furious spent 20 years in private hands with owners who had no idea what they were holding, and one of them came within hours of being stripped for parts. The Cobra Mercury, Stallone's personal car, ended up in a junkyard before eventually being stolen from a storage garage and sitting missing for 17 years. These are not anomalies. These are the standard outcome for film vehicles when the production wraps and nobody is watching. The Mustang is one more entry in that ledger, a car that served a film, helped build an iconic character, and then walked out the door into a world that wasn't ready to understand what it was worth. So here is where we actually are. A 1967 Ford Mustang fastback appeared in Cobra in 1986, drove sequences that put it in direct service of one of the most brazenly entertaining action films of its decade, and then left the production through whatever disposal channel was most convenient at the time. Its current location is unconfirmed. Its chain of ownership is undocumented in any public record, and the collector market that would treat it like the artifact it is has no idea where to find it. The Mercury came home after 17 years because Stallone found it on an auction listing and filed a lawsuit with a complaint that opened with a movie quote. That is an extraordinary story, and it has a resolution. The Mustang story doesn't have a resolution yet. It has an open question.